And I'd formally like to welcome you to today's screening of today's installment of the Schools Project, Unchartered Territory, Charter Schools for Better or Worse. WTTW is part of an initiative called American Graduate, Let's Make It Happen. And that plan is to help lower the dropout rate in the Chicago area and continue a dialogue about education from all members of the community. We're honored to be a partner with the School Project and present to you what is the fifth film in a series of very thoughtful short-form documentaries on a myriad of issues impacting today's children in the classroom. Uncharted Territory premiered on WTTW on Thursday on Chicago Tonight. If you will see it in a few minutes, but if you want to tell your friends where to watch it, go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight, and you'll be able to access a clip at any time at your convenience. We're going to have an opportunity to engage after the film with a very good panel, but we also need to hear from you. You're a big part of the conversation, and we're going to be trying to take as many questions as possible from you in the audience. But if you're not in the audience, you may be watching at home, because we're also airing live on CAN TV on cable channel 27 or on a live stream on cantv.org. So I know a lot of you can't get out and be here watching at home, and we want to also hear from you. The School Project's going to be capturing comments via social media, so if you go on Twitter and use the hashtag CharterChat, please submit your thoughts and comments throughout this presentation. So to get us started, it's my pleasure to welcome and tell you a lot more about the School Project, one of the premier producers in the Chicago region. He's done many films for PBS, and he is one of the co-producers of today's production. So please welcome to the stage Bob Hercules.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Dan, and thank everybody for coming out on a beautiful Chicago spring day. We are really thrilled to be here, thrilled to have this tremendous turnout. I want to thank our sponsors, one of which is WTTW Channel 11, and also the Department of Cultural Affairs Collaborative City Project. So thank you, and thanks to the Cultural Center for allowing us to be here today. This is a beautiful venue, and we're always thrilled to be here. I want to just very briefly tell you how this started. About 2 years ago, in March of 2013, as many of you will recall, there was a lot of news about potential school closings. I think at one point there was about 120 potential schools that were going to be closed. So some documentary filmmakers in Chicago, myself included, came around this issue, and we decided that this was such an important story that it had to be told, that we wanted to tell this story because it would impact not only Chicago but potentially the entire nation, because this would be the biggest school closings in American history. So we thought, this is such a big issue, we need a big team of people. So we enlisted our fellow documentary filmmakers, and we came up with really an incredible group of people to work on this series. And it's somewhat, I think, somewhat unprecedented. So I just wanted to mention the partners, our production partners are Free Spirit Media, Cartemquin Films, Kindling Group, my own company, Media Process Group, Siskel Jacobs Productions, and independent producers Melissa Stern and Rachel Dixon. So all these groups, we got together and somehow we pulled this off. So this is the fifth of our six-part series. The second thing we did that was, I think, somewhat unusual, once we decided to do this as a web series, is we enlisted a number of outreach partners that would help us amplify our message and amplify our segments. So somewhat unusual, but we were lucky enough to enlist some amazing partners, WTTW Channel 11, Catalyst Chicago, the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago History Museum, Ebony.com, the Community Media Workshop, StoryCorps, and CAN TV, who are streaming the project right here, right with that camera right there. So as Dan said, if you know anybody who can't be here, you can send them a message to watch it live right now on CAN TV. I also wanted to just thank a couple people for coming here today. One is Terry Mazzani. Terry is the president of the Chicago Community Trust, and he's here somewhere. And Terry is actually, there he is. Thank you, Terry, for coming. He's featured in the film. Also, 15th Ward Alderman Raymond Lopez, I believe, is also here. And Mr. Lopez has been a supporter of the project from the beginning, so thank you for coming. Then finally, we couldn't have done this without our funders. So I want to thank the Richard H. Driehaus Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, the Chicago Digital Media Production Fund, which is a program of Chicago filmmakers, and the Vocal Fund. All those funders have helped make this possible. So we thank them. We're entirely indebted to them. And we are going to have a panel discussion afterwards led by WTTW's Elizabeth Brackett, so stick around for that. We are, if you want to join our conversation, go to our website, which is schoolprojectfilm.com, by using the hashtag #TheSchoolProject on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll have a QA afterwards, as I said, and we'll also have a chance for audience that are not here to feed in questions via Twitter as well. So it'll be a totally social media mania when we're done here. So thank you for coming, and now I'd like to present the 5th of our series. It's called Unchartered Territory. Thank you.
CBS 104! We don't need no charter schools! CBS 104! We don't need no charter schools!
It's January 2014. In the wake of the closing of 50 neighborhood schools in Chicago, a group of teachers and parents are protesting the proposed opening of 17 new charter schools.
These schools are only growing in the Black and the colored communities. We want them to put the proper resources in the schools that are there and make use of them.
4 months later, there was another rally, this time in favor of charter schools.
We're here today to show our support, teachers, parents, students. We're all here to show our support for charter schools and to really show everybody that people want charter schools. We want money for charter schools because they do great things for our students.
With so much polarization, we wanted to find out exactly what charter schools are and why they have become such a flashpoint in the broader debate about public education.
We currently have a battle between two fundamental ideologies for schools. The neighborhood model looks at education as a public good that the community provides for all children. And then there's a market-based choice approach, which places the responsibility for education on the individual. And those clash at a most fundamental level.
This market-based approach is embodied by charter schools, but that's not how they were originally conceived. In 1988, Teachers Union President Albert Shanker and others proposed a completely new type of school. They would be laboratories of innovation, freed from stifling bureaucracy.
I propose that we now need to seek ways that will enable any group of teachers to say, we've got an idea. We've got a way of doing something very different. We've got a way of reaching the kids that are now not being reached by what the school is doing. That group of teachers could set up a school within that school, which ultimately would be a totally autonomous school.
There's no doubt that 20 years ago, one of the intents of the charter movement was to create better schools for students who need them. A charter school is very simply a public school funded publicly that operates under a contract issued by a public body, usually a school board. The contract itself specifies a level of achievement the school has to meet in exchange for flexibility and autonomy.
The notion was, why don't you be sort of research and development for doing school, and we'll learn from your practice.
The charter schools were not intended to be competition for public education. They were intended to be collaboration.
As originally conceived, the innovations developed at charter schools would eventually inform instruction in regular schools. But as charters evolved, they were increasingly championed by advocates of privatization and free markets, and became positioned as a choice for parents dissatisfied with neighborhood schools.
School choice is critically important because it empowers the people who need it most. Parents in communities who have schools that don't work for their families. And that might be because the school is not performing well, it might be because the school is not suitable, it might be because the parent wants a different curricular approach.
But in reality, it takes a certain level of engagement to exercise the option of choice. If that is not provided equitably, then it's no choice for individuals who remain with their neighborhood school.
The fact is, we still have a lot of schools that we need to fix. And if you're trying to get there quickly, sometimes the better option is to put a charter there and close one or more of the neighborhood schools. You're still going to have a neighborhood school choice.
While neighborhood schools still exist, there are fewer of them. CPS enrollment has been declining steadily for years, contributing to the historic decision to close 49 elementary schools in 2013. Yet since 2011, CPS has added 26 new charter campuses.
I feel like the board intentionally creates crises in schools, enrollment crises. They gave permission for Noble Street to open up a school across the street from Prosser High School. I mean, why else would they do that unless they were trying to create a crisis situation at Prosser?
There's no doubt that a much higher percentage of students in the city of Chicago today are being educated by private interests, whether they're private companies or non-for-profits. They are privately run schools with public money.
The idea that charter schools have a privately run component is one of the misconceptions about charter schools. Under Illinois law, all charter schools are nonprofit public entities.
However, the charter holder can subcontract out to various corporations. Chicago International Charter Schools subcontracts out the operation of 3 or 4 of its schools to Charter Schools USA, which is a for-profit educational management company from Florida.
Charter schools are given a set budget based on the students they enroll, and they can spend that as they see fit, on teachers, on equipment, on field trips, on college counselors, and that's different than traditional schools, where the budget is dictated by a central office down to the school level.
One of the appealing aspects of a charter is that in spite of having high accountabilities for outcomes, you have a lot of freedom. We thought, God, wouldn't it be great to have a high school whose sole purpose was to go to an under-resourced community, put together the kind of school that had them not only graduate from high school, but go to and through college. And we've been on that for 17 years now.
I want to bring it back to neuroscience. As an adult, my brain should be fully developed physiologically, okay? But his, what's going on with his?
A security guard costs $30,000 to $40,000 a year. We want to take that money and channel it back into our students' lives. So we take that money and we invest in programs like Phoenix Rising.
And the notion was, why don't we send our kids in high school to colleges and universities around the country that have high-quality program for high school kids? In a regular CPS school, this would have been strangled by the lawyers, but we were free to do it. And it's since grown into a graduation requirement.
Hansberry College Prep is an international baccalaureate school, and we're very, very proud to be the only charter in the state of Illinois to offer the diploma program. Our students actually come from all over the city of Chicago, although the greatest number of students come from Auburn Gresham. It definitely is a high-need community. Our school is 89% free and reduced lunch. Because of the flexibility that we have, I am able to hire a full-time social worker. We do have special educators to meet the students' needs, and we're able to offer an advisory program that helps them in their social-emotional development as well.
Even though charter schools are only anticipating a 10% increase in their student population, they're getting 12% more in their budget.
Charter schools have this kind of weird symbiotic relationship with the public sector, in that they get the vast majority of their funding from the public, but they don't have the accountability mechanisms that public schools have to have.
The problem stems from the authorizer, the school district, that is approving these charter schools and giving them this money with not too many strings attached.
Their budgets are not always publicly accessible. They don't have the requirement for public hearings or that. And so it creates an opportunity for the misuse of public funds.
A politically connected charter school operator coming under scrutiny tonight amid allegations it has misused taxpayer money.
Yeah, Jeff, the United Neighborhood Organization has risen to be one of the city's most powerful Latino community groups in recent years, but now its CEO has resigned and its spending is coming under state and federal scrutiny.
It's one thing to have the freedom to teach the way that you want to teach, and it's another thing to have the freedom to hide how you're spending public money. And I don't think accountability and transparency for the public money that they're getting will keep them from being innovative as educators.
We should show our budgets. We should say, this is the amount per student we're spending. This is our success rate. This is a very good and healthy conversation.
If there are concerns about influence, the public entity can close the charter school after hearings. So we work together with our school board partners and with the state board to make sure charter schools are publicly run and for the public interest.
Certainly there is a trend overall toward taking what was considered to be absolutely public responsibilities, turning them over into private hands. Is that good or bad? I think that depends on how much public officials demand accountability from the schools in terms of performance and in terms of their stewardship of public dollars.
I think that we can do a better way of reforming the system, but we need to reform it as a public system and not as a system that's going to have like this private control that then takes education out of the hands of the public.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to bring up to the stage our moderator, Elizabeth Brackett from WTTW, and our panelists. Thank you.
WTTW, and I'm going, mic on. Get a little closer. I'm used to those lapel mics. There. How's that? Better? Okay. Well, I bet you heard the first part. I'm Elizabeth Brackett from WTTW, your moderator for this afternoon's panel. And in a few moments, I'll introduce our panelists, but I'd like to give a brief introduction. You know, the Chicago Public Schools has its vision is that every student in every neighborhood will be engaged in a rigorous, well-rounded instructional program and will graduate prepared for success in college, career, and life. Now the question is, does that have to be in a particular kind of school? Chicago Public Schools says that every student will be engaged in this, and that so the question is whether this has to be in a regular neighborhood school, in a charter school. Does the kind of school make any difference in fulfilling this vision? The 1988 School Reform Act gave more power to parents, communities, and principals in trying to decide the strategies that would bring this vision to fruition. Then in 1996, charter schools were authorized to give parents and communities a choice. And because these charters were freed up from bureaucratic requirements and from union contracts, the hope was that they would provide significantly better educated students and achieve better student achievement results. Today, there is evidence that there are a handful of charters that have met the expectations for dramatic increases in students' performance. But there are also a good number of regular Chicago public schools that have turned around their previously failing schools while serving the same kind of demographics that they had originally. So the purpose of this afternoon's discussion is not to pit CPS schools against charter schools, not to pit teachers' unions against school administrators. What we're trying to do is find out what the successful schools are doing. What are the successful schools doing that achieve the results that fulfills the vision of the Chicago Public Schools? And what can be shared? How can these successful results be shared between CPS schools and charter schools? And I'd also like to remind you that following discussion, we'll be taking questions from all of you and also from social media, and that hashtag is #CharterChat. So joining us for this discussion are panel members. On the far end, Dr. Carlos Escotia. He's a member of the Chicago's Board of Education. He was appointed by Mayor Emanuel in 2012. He's a former Chicago school principal at the Fry School for 9 years, and he's also now a professor of educational leadership at National Louis University. And next we have Stacy Davis Gates, the political and legislative director of the Chicago Teachers Union and a former classroom teacher. And we then have Sarah Karp. She's the deputy editor of Chicago Catalyst magazine. Catalyst Chicago is an independent news organization that covers school improvement in Chicago and has done a great job in covering a lot of the charter school movement. Michael Milkey, superintendent of the Noble Network of Charter Schools, a former Chicago public school teacher. Noble Network has 16 high schools and serves 10,000 students in Chicago. So let's begin. First question is, so what is the key to establishing a culture of high performance in schools among students, teachers, and principals, whether in charter schools or in regular Chicago public schools? How do you establish that culture of high performance? Michael Milkey, we'll start with you.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. So I think the most important ingredient is high quality adults in the building. We focus that at Noble, and I think many schools, district and charter, have that as a huge focus, but getting high quality principals usually lead to high quality teachers. Those are the most important ingredients, and from there come great ideas and great instruction and great teaching and great school culture, but that's a start. And what I love about working at a charter school is that we have a lot more freedom around hiring and around compensation for those adults, which I think helps us bring the best adults possible.
Dr. Scotia?
Well, first of all, we want to ensure that all models have a quality educational program. In any model, I think it's the quality of the classroom that drives that local approach with a good building principle and the integration of school, family, and community. I think parents play an important role in this whole process. It's been instrumental for me, as a leader to do that. And then to understand that education is influenced by what happens inside and outside the school. And I think we have to pay attention to that.
Stacey?
Well, I would say they need high quality neighborhoods, quite frankly, that you cannot divorce the achievement of what goes on in that school from what is in that neighborhood. So when you have a city with 1,800 homicides, 10,000 shootings, the absence of mental health care, parents who have low wages, they're underpaid, they work 2 and 3 jobs. These are things that impact the school more so than any other curricular design that we continue to put there or not put there. So the standardization of what works is really what does not work. So I would say if we really want to figure out student achievement, we need to figure out neighborhood and community achievement.
Let me ask you a question about that. Is it up to the educators and the parents to try to figure out neighborhood conditions that impact their school?
Absolutely. I think that we are all partners in that. Quite frankly, you don't get 90% of Chicago saying that they want an elected school board without them wanting to be a part of this determination of the type of decisions that are made with regard to the schools that exist in the neighborhoods where they also exist.
How do you put this together, Sarah?
Well, I'll say one thing first of all. I'm not an educator. I have not been in the classroom. One thing that I've covered a lot, though, when it comes to charter schools versus district-run schools is the issue of teacher turnover. And while Mike Milkey says that it's important, the adults in the building, and actually Noble Street does not have as high teacher turnover, but a lot of the charter schools in Chicago have very, very high teacher turnover, like 50% every year. And one reason for that is that they have very long school days, and that's one of their selling points. And they get a lot of young teachers, and they're burned out because a lot of them are not paying teachers as much as a unionized teacher. That's changing a little bit. We have charter school teachers starting to unionize and demand that they get paid, but I think that's one of the lingering issues that still is out there.
Well, let's again look at the overall broad issue of what makes a quality school. Does it make any difference if it's a charter school or if it's a regular neighborhood public school? Does anything change? And do charters have any particular ability to create this kind of culture of achievement that is so necessary? Mike?
Sure. So I think that the biggest flexibilities that we have are around budget and staffing, and that's where Stacy talked a lot about the difficulties that students have in the communities and that they bring that to school, and there's no question. So we have flexibility. To us, it's important to get the high quality adults, but we also can say, you know what, we need more social workers at our school. We'll have to give up something else, but we see how difficult some of these students' lives are, and that ability to say we're going to have more social workers per student, by far than the district, is something that we can only do because of the flexibility. So I think creating that culture of high expectations is not easy. You do have to have high quality adults, but I think if you add flexibility in there, that's your best chance to serve the students well.
So what is it about flexibility? How much more flexibility do charters really have than a well-functioning Chicago public school, would you say? How much flexibility do you feel like you had at Fry to bring in the kind of resources you needed to turn that school around?
I believe in school autonomy, but I also believe that quality neighborhood schools should have school autonomy. And that is something.
And do they?
Well, right now we're working on those standards. It has to be deserved autonomy. Just like we're developing.
What is autonomy? What do you mean
Well,
by
autonomy based on the growth of the students in the school and the progress that they make and the connections that they have to the communities that they are serving. So one of the reasons, I went back as a principal in 2003 was to start a high school and convert the school into a pre-K through high school. And then, of course, I wanted very similar autonomies that charter schools had. And we were able to get that through a program. So we're now going back to that. We're developing the standards first, just to make sure that we have to take a look at not only achievement, attendance, discipline, the number of special needs students served, English language learners, and those schools that do well will have similar autonomies. And as a board member, and our board is working on that issue.
Stacey, go ahead.
I was just going to add, and as a charter leader, I absolutely believe that those flexibilities we have should be given to all neighborhood schools too. So it's not, why do charters get this and neighborhood schools don't? I think they should, and I think just like Carlos showed at Community Links, there really is a lot of power in that, giving principals and teachers more control over things like budget, curriculum, and staffing.
From what I've seen looking at charter schools versus district-run schools is that autonomy is not a panacea for anything. There are good charter schools that are using that flexibility in ways that are impressive, but there's a lot of charter schools that frankly look like schools in the 1950s. They're using the flexibility to go back in time. It's not as though there's anything intrinsic with a charter school that makes it a good school or anything intrinsic with a district-run school that makes it a good school.
And we also have to be conscious of this cultural narrative that's being established with this push and pull between neighborhood and charter, and to be very clear about the decisions that have been made that focus this particular narrative. You have in Chicago, if you look at this map of school closures over the course of the years, not just the 50 that occurred in 13, but the many over the course of the Renaissance 2010 program, you see this map of closures, and you also see very clearly this proliferation of these privately ran organizations. And so you have Prosser right now, which is across the street from a Noble Street. So that decision to put these schools right across the street from each other, what will be that impact? Well, we know from past practice that impact means that that neighborhood school will no longer exist. And so, and then juxtaposed to the closings of schools in this city, we've also seen this precipitous decline of African American women who were teachers in these schools as well. So you have this cultural narrative that my community is under-resourced, compromised, and considered bad in effect, and that the Black teachers who were once leaders in those schools that have been under-resourced and forgotten about for generations, right, that they are bad too because they were failing teachers. But when this new shiny facility then comes to the neighborhood with a wider, younger population of educators, that they are somehow better. We have to be very clear about this narrative that's being established with this insinuation of school deform.
Let me, if I can just add something to that, because when the proposal to open this very close to Prosser, you know, I questioned it. Prosser had over 1,500 students on a waiting list. And I think the new approach here is how do we learn from one another, which was depicted here in your documentary. How do we share best practices together? There's an impact now on the district. This is legislation that is occurring, and we're not maximizing the benefits from making sure that we learn from quality charters, and charters learn from quality neighborhood schools. You know, I've been a principal coach, and I took some of the new principals to quality neighborhood schools and to quality charters, including Noble, to take a look at some of those practices. That sends a message in how districts need to be run.
But I also want to just interject slightly and just challenge something here. There are two conversations that are going on here right now. One about the decisions that are made at the board level or the central office level to place these types of pitting these two, you know, dynamics against one another. And then there are also the things that happen inside the buildings, which also are determined too by the board, which is appointed, and by those in central office. So we have to be very clear about the decisions that are being made in these dynamics. It's not just about we love our children. I don't think you're going to get anyone who says that they don't love the children. I don't think you're going to get anyone who says that they're not doing this for the children. We're not talking about intent. We're talking about impact. And the impact has been mixed at best and terrible if you look at what's going on the south and west sides of the city. Terrible when you think about what's going on with teachers who have put lots of years into their craft, who have, put lots of years into their education. They no longer work in this system anymore. And the turnover rate, as Sarah referenced earlier, is basically mind-blowing when it comes to the charter dynamic right now. So we have to, again, be very conscious about the decision-making skills that have not been put to good use, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. The decision-making process as to, remember initially, as we saw in the documentary, charters were initially brought onto the scene to become a laboratory of experimentation to try and find new and better ways to educate kids. And it was then thought that those methods could be brought over into public schools. They were a laboratory to find a better way to meet this goal of educating all children. And in many ways that has happened, in some ways it has not happened. But let's get to how the Chicago Board of Education makes the decisions as to when a charter will be brought to a neighborhood. And let's specifically talk about Prosser, because that seems to be bothering a lot of people in the charter discussion. So I'm actually going to start with you, Michael. Mm-hmm. When Why did Noble Street decide that that neighborhood, right across the street from the public school, needed a charter high school?
So we certainly looked at the demographics enrollment around that school, and not around Prosser, around where our location was. You know, in retrospect, it's not the ideal location. Unfortunately, real estate's really tough to find in Chicago, and in an overcrowded area, and again, as referenced with many on the waiting list at Prosser, we thought in that neighborhood of Belmont-Cragen, that's where a good new high school could serve. And of course, you've got overcrowding at Taft also. So we're hoping to help with that. But yeah, right across the street is not, it just was the only place that we found that did it. And we've, I think, established a really good relationship with Prosser administration, and we hope that we together work well in that neighborhood.
I want to add, because your comments relate also to accountability, it is up to the school district to determine, you know, how are you going to process these applications and what standards are going to be applicable. And right now, we're developing this single accountability system that applies to all schools, and that's why we've put 17 on a warning list.
17
We've
charters.
closed 17 charters, we've closed 2, and we're holding charters to similar standards, and we're evolving with that process because they have individual contracts. It cannot be a strategy to transform a system. And in my time, since I've been a board member, we're developing this SQRP process based on growth, which is our new way of determining schools. And that's something that's going to grow so that all schools perform.
Well, let's look at how charters and Chicago Public Schools actually have performed. Now, you get into this knotty question of what the studies have shown about performance, and believe me, it is knotty. But as I tried to do some analysis of an aggregate of studies, this is what I came up with. There was an analysis of nationwide studies such as the Credo study. That's a very large study of charter schools across the country from the Center for Research on Education Outcomes. And the National Education Policy Center did an analysis of those studies and found that the variation in performance in reading between charter schools and regular public schools is less than 1/100 of 1%. They also noted that the press release that went out after that was charter schools outperform neighborhood public schools. So you got to read the numbers. Then the Chicago Sun-Times and the Medill Data Analysis at Northwestern study in 2013 found little evidence in standardized test results that charters are performing better than traditional CPS schools. So the question is, how do you analyze these studies? When you look at them overall, it appears that there are some highly performing charter schools, just as there are some highly performing Chicago public schools. There are some charter schools that are not performing well, as there are certainly Chicago public schools that are not performing well. And it doesn't seem that there is a great deal of difference if you're just looking at test scores in terms of performance. Michael?
Yeah, so I wouldn't just look at test scores. And in fact, I think there's so many other things that are important. What we have, for instance, WBEZ just came out with a study that showed that the number of students that stay at charter schools that start in 9th grade and end up graduating in 12th grade is higher than the average and significantly higher than the district schools or the non-selective schools. So that's important, how many kids stay. And if you look at dropout rates or mobility rates, again, those are all better for charters on average. The same with the 5 essentials. So Chicago, University of Chicago does a 5 essentials study where they look at culture and the staff, culture of the students, safety and all of that. And that's really important to us, and we look to score high on that and have every year, and I think that's another way. So test scores is one way to look at it, and I think that's important, but there are so many other ways, and I think actually the difference charters provide are less on test scores and more on school culture and college enrollment.
One thing I would just want to say about the WBZ, it was actually a WBZ Catalyst data that looked at children who stay, and Noble Street was very high, which was actually kind of surprising because we've often heard that a lot of Noble kids leave. So, but there was a number of charters that were surprisingly low, including Urban Prep, which, you know, we've also heard, you know, they very much talk about their their graduation rate and how many kids go to college, and only 30% of kids who started their freshman year actually stay. So I think that you have to sort of look at, I think that this whole dichotomy is just a false dichotomy to look at, oh, do charters do well or do district schools do well? I mean, individual schools do differently, and it's just a false analysis. A Noble is a completely different school than an urban prep. It's a different school. So how can we say globally what it is? I don't.
But we do have to have some way to measure whether or not charter schools are effective, and whether or not we need charter schools in order. And when we're looking at the overall resources that we want to provide our children.
Yes, and that's why this school quality review process is going to be applicable to renewals and to taking a look at the applications. However, as a board member, I always ask those questions about any school, because you want quality in all school models. So we know that district-run schools are doing a little bit better than charter schools. We have 6% of charter schools that have a designation of level 3. And, in that process, we have 4% of district-run schools that are in level 3 schools, which are considering the quality review process, that low standard. And then on the other side, you have 62% of charters that receive the higher standards, and district-run schools, 68%. However, there are variations, and there are variations in terms of quality. So that's the data that we have currently, and that's why we are revamping the process.
I actually don't think that it is necessarily a test score issue. I actually think that it's more an ideology issue. If the school district and the city think that turning over schools to private entities is something that is good for the whole school district, because if it's great for the kids that go to Noble, but sucks for the kids that wind up at Tilden, or sucks for the kids that wind up at Robeson, then is it really a good strategy overall? And I think that we have to look at, I actually just think this is it's such a weeds questions, and you're just never going to answer it on an average.
We have been, I'm sorry.
And beyond that, what are the stakes attached to such standards and stakes? So what we've seen here is that when we standardize things, they close, people are fired, children are dislocated, communities are forever compromised. So it's the stakes. So am I evaluating this to resource you better? Am I evaluating this to make sure that you get the types of resources, the particular and specific types of resources that will help you meet the goals of a said achievement? It's not necessarily just about accountability for the sake of accountability, but it's about the sake of evaluation to figure out what you need to make you to help you reach said goals. And so what we've seen with the types of decisions that are being made here in Chicago is that now we're going to close charter schools. Let's be clear, closing schools do not work. We're clear about what works and what doesn't work. That doesn't work. So now just to make this equal or equitable and take this argument away, we're going to close them too. Nah, closing schools hurt children.
But that brings a little more equity. That brings equity and excellence. Because you're taking a look at what has happened. But let me say this. Even in district-run schools, we've had a system of choice. We've had a system of choice with magnet schools, with selective schools, and sometimes there is high mobility in certain areas. I think the part that brings equity here is the school quality review process and a greater support with neighborhood schools. And we have been emphasizing that in terms of a new office that does that we call it OS4, just as the charters have certain supports that will provide them. So we're trying to achieve among the options, that centeredness for equity and excellence in all models.
And I would say equity and excellence.
Just a second. Go ahead.
I'm real short. Just the SQRP that Carlos is talking about does not just look at test scores. It looks like at attendance rate and college graduation, freshman on track, 5 essential scores. So it is a comprehensive.
It is growth, based on growth.
And about test score growth, not absolute.
But again, equity and excellence begins with investment in curriculum, investment in those who work there, investment in the communities and the families that send their students there, and investment in the types of resources, making sure that kids have a music teacher, a physical education teacher, an art teacher. They begin and they end with investment. And until we get to the point of where we say equity and excellence begins with those things and not in just making sure everyone takes the same test, then we're not going to get there.
And I agree with that, because community schools represent that. It is the integration of school, family, and community. It's partnerships, addressing things that affect learning. There are cognitive and non-cognitive factors for student success, which are not only substantiated on a test score. So I'm all in favor for that. And as a board member, we're going to bring that sense of balance to the degree that we can with limited resources.
Let's talk about one thing that has created some concern between charters and Chicago public schools, and that's the discipline programs. So in the study, the Catalyst that you did, it was reported that CPS suspensions were down by 23% last year. It also found that the number of African American males suspended continued to increase. Now, but you can't find, as I understand it, those same statistics for charter schools. And so we don't know how many suspensions there are in charter schools, so it's difficult to analyze what is going on there. Apparently charter schools aren't required to follow the CPS discipline code and report suspensions. Is that an accurate representation, and if so, why not?
Well, that's what the Illinois Network of Charter Schools tells us, is that, well, I guess they were saying because suspensions aren't all the same, and so there's different people reporting them differently, which is, you know, I don't know exactly how many definitions of suspension we can come up with, but that is one of the issues. And the thing is that the code of one of the autonomies is the code of conduct. And so the question is if we say all charter schools must follow the code of conduct, all charter schools must lower suspension, does it change those charter schools? And if so, then are we going to just make them into district-run schools? I mean, we have to. I think that's an important autonomy, according to lots of charter schools.
Michael,
Yes.
I think that's a good question for you.
Well, yeah, and I agree, it is an important autonomy, and I think you do have to look at the whole picture. So we do report suspensions in WBEZ. Again, I'm using them, maybe Catalyst too. Had a 2013 study where they did compare suspension rates at district and charter, and we give information on suspensions. We reported to the state. They showed at elementary schools suspensions were higher. At charters, at high schools, they were about the same. But you also have to look at the other parts of that. So our attendance rate compared to district high schools is about 15 to 20% higher. Over 200 days in a school year, that's an extra 30 to 40 days that they're in school. And part of it is students do feel safe. And yes, it's important to us to have our own code of conduct so that students feel safe, that teachers feel safe, that teachers can teach without disruption. And I think that's one of the most attractive things to families is they know that safety is going to be there. And we can do it, I think, with a similar amount of suspensions. But I think the flexibility in the code of conduct allows us to have that school culture that keeps kids in school, both attendance-wise and staying at the school as opposed to leaving it.
I think it has been substantiated that suspensions, citywide, all schools, have been decreasing as well as expulsions. And I think many times when you are in the process of renewing charters, you not only have to consider that, you have to consider how many are transferred back to neighborhood schools, and there is variation, how many students are served from those communities in close proximity, and this is why we're paying attention to those elements so that you have a system of equity, among all school models and not some at the expense of others.
So a couple of things. I started with this conversation about a cultural narrative. And so Sarah pointed out very astutely that African American males, black boys, are being put out of school at record rates, and even more so in the dynamic of the privately operated charter schools. So what you have is a school culture with very novice teachers who are not culturally competent, perhaps, in the communities in which they teach. You have very few experienced teachers where a disruption in a classroom to an experienced teacher may mean something quite different from that of a novice teacher. I've been a novice teacher before. I know how that works. Beyond that, you have this very real dynamic of a school to prison pipeline. So does this autonomy give way to these wraparound services that will help to train the teacher to understand where he or she is working and how to relate better? Does this autonomy also mean that we are putting our arms around our Black boys in a way that helps them to lessen the stigma of being Black in America, as we see is obviously quite dangerous nationally? What are we doing with this autonomy that we have, and how are we holding these people with autonomy more accountable? I can say in Springfield that both the Board of Education and the charter school dynamic fought very fiercely against any type of infringement on their ability to suspend boys out of these schools. So when I hear this, it sounds awesome, but realistically, what happens is that the high-powered lobbyists come out, and what they do is stand in the way of this true equity and excellence and discipline.
Well, if I can add cultural competence.
Let me have Michael answer that one.
Well, I want to invite Stacy to come to a Noble school, because that's absolutely not the case. And many of those teachers are out in the audience today. Even those schools that are there, if you see students who are engaged, who are happy, who are well behaved, and our teachers are really good at trying to, especially African American males, but all students, to support them. And that's why we have extra social workers. And again, we have to give up other things to get there, but you have to come and see it. And if you do see it, you'll see that in fact, the freedom that we have around that, and we want to continue those freedoms, does end up with more kids in school every day, more kids graduating. We have African-American male college-going rate at Noble, and probably also, at Urban Prep, who chooses to work with one of the most, disadvantaged populations. So it's hard to, be critical when people are really trying to serve those students who are most in need. But the end results are really great for them, and that's what I think is most important. And please come and see for yourself, because it really is a very positive environment.
I would absolutely say that you actually have to be critical of those who are taking care of our children, especially in communities that have been marginalized and under-resourced historically and for generations, and that criticism has to be real. You don't get over 1 million Black men in prison because everyone in those communities are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. In fact, I would submit that it is exactly why we have to be more critical, why we have to look at the statistics, and why we do have to visit to see if different colors of shoelaces and gym shoes warrant demerits and payments to a school by parents who come from poor neighborhoods. If you have parents who are making under $15 an hour, who are working 2 and 3 jobs, who have to pay for a detention, there is something amoral about that, not just culturally insensitive, but amoral.
Let me just say, developing cultural competency, it's an ongoing effort nationwide in all of our schools. If you take a look at suspension rates and expulsion rates, even within neighborhood schools, some do worse than others. So we have to take a look at all of those practices in all school models to be able to address that, because every student has a cultural identity, and that's critical to developing that academic identity.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to go to questions from the audience, because I know you've got a lot of questions out there. But just very quickly, what do you think the appropriate relationship or the ratio should be between charter schools and CPS schools? How many charter schools should there be? How many CPS schools should be? What should that appropriate relationship be?
Well, currently we have about 131 charter schools. We have
14%.
Right, 14%.
Higher or lower? What do you think the ultimate relationship might be?
Well, right now I can tell you that in 15-16, no charter school will be opened. Now, sometimes you have to take a look at applications. Otherwise, you have a charter school commission that can overpower that, and they can create that. But you have to take a look at the quality of applications. We've set now an issue that we need to take a look at overcrowded areas where you don't have the opportunity to build a school, and take a look at that particular area, see where students are on a waiting list. So that's what I can tell you at this point.
Is there a number down the road that the board has in mind?
I don't think we can come up with a very specific number in terms of that.
Ratio?
It has to take a look at the quality. It has to take a look at what we have. And we have those numbers right now, which is 14% of our students attend charter schools. We've had demographic changes. We have variations in quality options in charters as well as neighborhood schools. So that's part of the data that needs to be assessed.
Stacy, a quick answer to that?
Yeah, right. So going back to decisions, the Board of Education behaves as if the Charter School Commission, the shadow decentralized organization that can approve charters in any school district here in the state, they did not slip against, or they did not slip in support of dissolving that entity last year or this year. The bill is now in the Senate. They have an opportunity, if they are offended by its insinuation into public education in Illinois, they can slip in support of the dissolution of that in the Senate. Number two, when we talk about decisions again, we closed 50 schools, but we have overcrowded classrooms on the South Side. How does it happen where you say that we're underutilized here, but we're overcrowded here? The first thing that should have been done is that we reevaluate school boundaries and how we can even things out, how we can rebalance and figure out how to do it with the least disruption.
The commission approved too that we rejected. It set a certain standards why we have to be cautious with that. They've acted on that, so.
And that's true, so join us in slipping in support of the dissolution bill.
Sarah.
This is beyond my pay grade. I don't know. I think that there's probably people who are thinking about that, and they're probably not even on the Chicago Public School Board.
And I would just say, I mean, we have huge demand, and we think that if parents want this, that's the most important data point out there, and we want to serve more students that way.
Okay. Thank you very much, panel members. We will now go to some questions from the audience.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm going to read a couple questions from Twitter throughout this Q&A. So just to start, why aren't charters required to make their budgets public? Seems like this is common sense. What's the holdup?
They actually are. They are subject to FOIA as of a couple of years ago, and we can FOIA their budgets. They're not on like a centralized website, but then again, they're not like submitted I don't think that they're like go through the same process as CPS, but in the sense that they, you can FOIA them, you can get their budgets, which is a great thing, and it's relatively new.
It's going to be a requirement for acceptance as well as renewal, how well those budgets are displayed, the money that's being spent, because they are public monies and they are fiduciaries and they have to be held accountable for that.
And that too was something that was dealt with in the General Assembly last spring. So it wasn't done willingly necessarily. It's now is mandated by state law.
Michael, where can we find your budget?
So it's Sarah has it, among others. Yeah, it is given to CPS and ISB. We always give the budget, and anyone who FOIAs us gets it. It's not kept in any lock safe. So, and we're happy that, I mean, we have no problem what Carlos said, that that's what'll have to be do it. That's fine. We think that that's the proper thing.
Go ahead.
Jeff Berkowitz, host and producer of the TV show Public Affairs. If I can ask first for the panel, but in particular the spokesman for the Noble Network Schools and with the emphasis on charter schools.
You get 8 questions.
Okay. No, I'm just saying that those are the two I'd like to kind of focus on the answer, and the board member from CPS. Governor Rauner said on Monday at the Education Writers Association here in town and today before Junior League, the important thing about standardized tests is not just comparing levels of one school with the other or levels of charter schools with traditional neighborhood school performance, but the growth. He said if you have a school that's, say, one level behind and another school is currently reading at grade level, say for 4th graders, you can't really tell who's performing. That school that's one level behind, maybe in the last year they moved their kids up an average of 2 grade levels. They're outperforming the other school even though they're behind. So I hope that's clear, and if I could get you, do you folks agree, are you in agreement with representing the charter schools, traditional neighborhood schools, with Governor Rauner?
Yes, growth, which is what should be measured, and I believe that's what Carlos will say.
Well, our new school quality process is based on growth, and we have seen the progress, you know, of many quality neighborhood schools move up. So we're moving this accountability system from this accountability to a school quality process. And of course, as a principal of a neighborhood school, I support that 100%. And now as a board member, I immediately back that up.
So if I ask for the data from the two of you tomorrow morning, I could get a lot of aggregated data addressing just that point, right?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm a mother of a daughter that is at a technical charter high school in Chicago. And she's the only school counselor. Sometimes she has 500 kids under her. And we were saying something about, and she also stays after school. She uses her own money that she does not get paid for to do these after-school activities. She has not had a raise in several years, and that's one of the reasons there is the overturn of the teachers. You get good teachers like her. She stays there because she really likes the students and she feels she can really help them. But 500 kids that she's had as a school counselor under her, that's really a lot. If the kids have problems, she cannot solve those problems for all those children.
So your question is?
And there's been principals that come and go, and teachers, and you mentioned there was parents. A lot of the parents are not there because they do work like in 2 and 3 different jobs, and they can't be there for school activities or school even, why is the teachers of the charter schools are so underpaid? This is the problem, and I want to find out, and you're losing a lot of good teachers. And for these charter schools, you want the charter schools, but you're not paying them. And I'm wondering why this is happening.
I guess, Michael Milkley, that would go to you.
So, first of all, I agree with others, Stacy, others who have said we need to resource our schools as strongly as possible. Once those resources are there and the same amount for each student, the flexibility, I think, helps that. In charter's case, the biggest reason we're not able to pay teachers as much is because we have facility costs that on average the district doesn't have. And the district is working on that, but we are diverting anywhere from $750 to $1,000 per student to facility costs, and that's where we're not able to, but we try, and I think the flexibility allows us to still get really high quality results. So I would say continue to resource schools well, and give district schools the same flexibility and help charters with facilities, and then I think we'll all be better off.
That varies from charter to charter. It varies from neighborhood school to neighborhood school. You make local decisions and decide based on your mission and your vision, your school improvement strategy, where you're going to spend the money, and there's variation.
And while that's true, the board, so I'm going to cut in on both of them. The Board of Education, as the authorizer, can put forth a list of standards that the charter dynamic has to put forth to have their charter renewed. So if in fact we want to protect the classroom and put more money there in the classroom, that also can be a requirement that the Board of Education puts forth to the charter dynamic. And then on top of that, if the management cost of these charter operations are minimized, then maybe you can resource the classroom more. And when I say classroom, I don't divorce that from the teacher.
That's part of the application and the renewal process.
Some of the charter schools have a philosophy that UNO was one of them. Now, I haven't looked at UNO's turnover rate as recently, but it used to be very high. And one reason for that was that Juan Rangel, who was the executive director, his thought was that you give a teacher a script and the actual human being standing in front of the child is not all that important. He told me that once. He said when I was doing a story about teacher turnover at UNO, he was like, it doesn't even matter. And so there was a philosophy there that now I think the new management might be rethinking that thought.
I think so. I think so.
Charters also, you also raise a great deal of money from the students as well. I mean, from your families as well, correct?
No.
or from sponsors.
We certainly raise money from philanthropists, but again, that just doesn't come close to even filling the facility gap. But that helps, and we're appreciative of that.
Okay. Over here.
Quick point of information and a question. So I'm an occupational therapist in citywide Chicago Public Schools. I've been an occupational therapist
since 2001. I think a lot of people might be a little bit misled in terms of Noble Street Charter School because most charter schools actually have CPS employed clinicians going in to service the students with the greatest amount of needs, disabilities. So they're not only getting funds for the regular ed population away from CPS, but they're also getting those funds and those clinicians away from the public schools for those kids. And I happen to know for a fact that CPS is yet to provide, looking at ISB guidelines from 2003, an equitable allocation for those clinicians within the public schools. Also a question. I love documentaries. I think that this is a great discussion and a great way to bring the community together. But I don't know how in the world you could start out with that vision, because the idea that CPS would have a vision in terms of equitable quality education is laughable. They continue to cut libraries, they continue to cut music, they continue to cut art. That is no way to support any community that is struggling.
This becomes a budget question. We have over $1 billion deficit. You have to make some hard decisions, but I'm in agreement that to bring equity, we need new sources of revenue, and we need to make sure that schools are funded appropriately.
But it's also decisions. We have to be very clear that decisions are being made about the revenue that's already there. So there are, the RFP process is open, they're looking through charter applications now. How many will be approved, quite frankly? So if there's this budget gap, and since I've been with CTU, there's been a budget cap every year. We've had to go to the reserves, or at least that's the headline. But beyond that, we have 10 charters since 50 school closings. Decisions.
I said before, no new charter is going to open in 15 and 16. And as we get the report, and as we continue to see changes in demographics and reducing students, as a board member and all the board members, we'll have to pay close attention to that.
Will any new charters be opened that have been approved previously?
Well, it might be, because, and I don't have, even some of them, applications were approved even prior to my term beginning on the board. And they just don't open once you submit the application. There's a timeline process.
So there could be some new ones opening, but no new ones will be approved.
2 years.
According to Steve, I was just asked this question Friday because of the new proposals, and I guess 2 that were approved are going to open in fall 2015. There's, I think, 4 others that were approved that aren't going to open. And the 2 that are going to open is this one called Moving Everest, that's by the Buy Your Hand Club, or some club out in the west side in Austin, and then also in Aspera business.
Right. They were pre-approved.
They were pre-approved
before.
prior
it's
to
not
this
a new
year.
charter.
Right.
So, Michael, with Noble Street, you would like to be able to open more charter schools. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, I mean,
Do you have applications in?
Yeah, we have for 2016 and 17. We have applications to open, and knowing that there'll be none that will open 2015. But yeah, we certainly have demand for that, and want to especially work in areas that are overcrowded currently to best help with the enrollment situation.
And they have college persistent data, and they have taken a look at their practices, and as part of the SQRP process, and willing to take a look at some of their practices.
Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I have to disagree with you on one thing. A lane lock charter, their entire program is based on young black boys doing very well, and most of them, they graduated from the 8th grade. A lot of them are at Loyola in the suburbs in Winnetka. Some of them are at Whitney Young, and they're all there academically, not sports or whatever. Yeah. But that is a charter on the west side, right across from Marshall High School, and they do outperform the neighborhood schools, and it's a matter of record. They've been the top.
No, you've demonstrated growth. Yeah. I'm aware of that.
No problem. But I was also a teacher at Trumbull CPS, and I also had contact with the union. And my thing is a pox on all their houses. You know, there's something wrong. I think there's money, too much money involved in all of this, and there are venture capitalists, lawyers, and administrators that are making careers with all this money. It's a big cash cow. There's got to be somebody to protect us from Barbara Bird Bennett or whatever, and all these other people, and the union too. There's people there also. I'm sorry. You know, there's just too much money in this, and nobody's protecting the kids or the parents.
Thank you.
Well, I think the parents and the kids have I think the parents in this community, as well as in this city, said that they want to protect themselves. That's why 90% of the voters in Chicago said that they wanted to elect a representative school board. That is also why the Chicago Teachers Union strongly supports parent autonomy. We are supporting a bill currently that is asking the state legislature to make sure that there are LSCs within the charter school dynamic. Something that the charter school dynamic is fighting against, quite frankly, is that parents should be a participant in the type of education that their students receive, as well as the communities where the schools exist. So absolutely, I believe that parents are the key to that. We know the out-of-school factors determine much of what happens in school.
Michael, how do parents participate in charters?
Well, you know, in that...
And with real power.
Oh, with real power. They have the most power that could be because they get a choice. And to us, and I think this whole movement is about providing high-quality choices to parents. And if we don't provide high-quality choice, we don't get them. That's the ultimate power. And, you know, I think that's where we have to always think every day when we get up, how do we best serve these parents that do have lots of issues outside of school and that really want the best for their students? And you know, let me give you a good example that we're able to do with our flexibility around budget and staffing is we bonus our teachers on the percent of parents that come to report card pickup because we think that's so important. We have it 4 times a year, and they're going to make a little bit more money if more than 90% of the parents come. And we have an average of about like 95% of parents coming to report card pickup because that contact is so important. But again, that flexibility in staffing and budget allows that to happen and serve the parents, I think.
Just a note about parent engagement, because I can say that as a principal. You know, the greatest influence of the student is the family, and on the family is the community. We are interdependent for that student's success, and we must find those connecting factors for meaningful parent engagement, especially in learning.
Let me go to Laura Wilson and see if there another hashtag charter chat question.
Yeah. So one question we had was, why do we have level 3 charter schools in Chicago? Shouldn't their charters be revoked?
Well, we said we had 17 on a warning list, and we've closed 2. In developing this accountability system, we're taking a look at when to do that, especially in the renewal process. If you have been at this stage for over 2 years, then the recommendation could be for closure.
And one thing to add is Noble took a low-performing charter school and assumed operation of it, and we were able to turn it into a high-performing, so the school didn't have to close. We just had a different operator run it, which is another possibility.
Okay, over here.
Thank you. I'm a charter school teacher, and I visited Noble, and I wanted to ask everyone on the board this question. What percentage do you think of Chicago students could manage to succeed in a charter school, a discipline system such as Noble? And what can be done for students who cannot thrive under that system?
You know, discipline is an ongoing issue because you want to develop, the ultimate goal of discipline is to develop self-discipline in all the students, and you have to take a look at your practices and your results. So we have 14% of our students in charter schools right now. And I think this is an ongoing staff development process, and different schools, just like Noble, are taking a look at their practices because they have to be held accountable. A student comes to your school and you have to develop a sense of belonging until you graduate. And if that is not happening, you must take remedied action.
So a couple of things that immediately come to my mind is restorative justice and people in these learning communities being able to provide such a thing in that school community, but also this connection and this autonomy and determination of the community and parents. Again, going back to an elected board, going back to an LSC in these places that are there, they probably won't be leaving, and can provide the consistency and the stability that's sorely needed there. And beyond that, experienced educators who have mastered their craft. Do not let anyone tell you that they have mastered any craft in this world in year 5. It just doesn't happen. It does not happen. You do not go to a resident, you go to the surgeon. You don't go to the fellow, you go to the surgeon. Only in this dynamic is it okay to tell me as a parent that it is okay to have a third-year teacher and this is the best thing ever. It is the best thing ever to have an experienced teacher and a third-year teacher. It is the best thing ever to have a balance of those in that building who understand that community, who are connected there, and who have an experience as an educator.
Restorative justice is moving forward, and it's bringing some results in all schools.
Are charters using restorative justice to what kind of an extent are they using it?
Well, you know, it depends how you define restorative justice. I know we don't use that by that term, but we work very proactively to work with students to say, how do you have, as Carlos said, that self-discipline where students are, whether it's through the advisory program where we have a teacher stay with them for 4 years, through the additional social workers, through the structure of the rules, all of that helps teach students discipline, self-discipline, which is ultimately what will keep them most successful as well as safe. And so I think that you could call that restorative justice. What we're really talking about is we want a place that's safe, and we want students to learn how to make good choices, and a lot of it is proactive. And we teach every freshman 7 habits of highly effective teens because that's important to us so that they learn these things as well as we have strict rules. But I think all together is why both students feel safe and more students stay with us and graduate with us because they do feel safe and they have developed those self-discipline habits.
Okay. Hi, my name's Kenneth Newman. Mr. Wilkie, I get emails requesting to become a teacher at Noble. And I have an Illinois substitute teaching certificate. And your website is so difficult to navigate, to fill out, to teach, that I've given up on it. And I have told other members of your staff this. So please make your website simpler so that people can actually join your...
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's way too complicated, way too long. And it's not, and simple, second thing.
Yes, those are noble teachers who are agreeing with you there.
And also to our board and our union rep. So why does CPS and the union conspire to deny those who have an Illinois substitute teaching certificate from subbing in CPS every day when there are at least 50 classrooms that go without teachers, at least, maybe it's 100 classrooms a day all over CPS do not have a teacher in them, and kids have to be split up into different classrooms.
Why don't you give a quick answer to that, and then I think we need to get...
Right.
If I'm not mistaken, the union has filed a class action grievance on that exact same thing, because not just you not being able to get the work, our teachers are overburdened because they're being requested and sometimes made to cover the classes that have not been, that have in their free periods, or excuse me, their preparation periods, those aren't free, but their preparation periods, they are being required to cover in a lot of cases. So I would say that there's no conspiracy there.
As a board member, I always get homework, and I want to bring your issue, and I want to ask questions, and I want to follow up with you.
I have other stuff for you too. Thank you.
Where?
I believe when we were closing schools, the main rationalization was underutilization. So I'm very concerned that with over 12,000 empty seats sitting in charter schools, why we are even considering even allowing the ones that were previously approved to open. And specifically for the gentleman from Noble, I'm a parent from Edgewater, and I'm extremely concerned that you would like to open up a campus in Rogers Park that will pull from Edgewater, Albany Park, West Ridge as proposed on the CPS website. We do not have an overcrowded situation going on in Edgewater. We have a very concentrated effort to support our neighborhood schools of Sullivan, Senn, Amundsen, and Lakeview, and we don't want the school there. So if you're trying to put schools in overcrowded areas, why are you trying to put a school in that area?
So first question, the 12,000 empty seats is really a misnomer. A lot of the schools, in fact, Noble has several schools that have many empty seats because we're just starting up and we start with the 9th grade, and so we'll only have a quarter of our school filled, but those show up as empty seats. But that said, we're hoping to open new schools in 2016. We're looking all over the city as to where would be the best spots, and we're looking in the north side as well as other sides, northwest, southwest, and possibly other places, but we're just still in that kind of searching phase.
I'm sorry, you didn't really answer my question though, because you just stated that you are only trying to open campuses in overcrowded areas. So can you
Well,
is
yeah.
that proposal on the website
Yeah.
not accurate? That says you want to. We've already had meetings in Rogers Park with Alderman Moore. Is that not accurate?
No, we have listed that as one of the communities, and remember the north side is really big, and certainly there are areas where we could help alleviate overcrowding, and of course it's most overcrowded at Taft, but we'll work with CPS, and we're really early in the process still. So
I think what she's doing is critical to this dynamic. You have a parent who's saying no, and
We
you
have
have a
lots who are
process,
saying yes.
and you have a process that continues. So this determination of the community and the parents is the priority in this discussion. So if it isn't a necessary tool, why is it being offered at the same time where a school board member here is saying we can't afford just the basic necessities of our students to begin with? Again, the young lady said here, 200 schools without libraries.
We have a deficit, and with empty seats, you don't get funding, and certainly we need the money. But the solution is the fact that even in charters, just as well as other schools, people gravitate to what they consider to be their choice options, and some of them, have they are fully enrolled, and others are not. So there's variation in that. So we'll have to take a look when we receive applications, our priorities, where it's needed, and our revenue.
Why has the decision been made not to approve any new charters for 2016?
Well, they haven't been in the pipeline. I think the ones that have opened are the ones that have been pre-approved in the past. And, we've had a lot of issues going on with budgeting, and we have to make sure, and we've had a decrease in demographics. When I started teaching in this school district, 1975, only yesterday, was my first year teaching as a college graduate. We had 580,000 students. Now, just from 2012 to 2014, we have lost from 404,000 and we're down to 396. All of those are variables that we need to consider.
So I guess I'm asking, is it a philosophical decision? Is it a budgetary decision? Is it on numbers?
It's part of the variables we have to examine as a board.
It's not even. I'm not even making a joke. I mean, the reason why they didn't go through the process this year is that usually the process would be in winter, and in the winter is when, there was a mayoral election going on. They weren't gonna have that noisy process happening at that moment.
Okay.
Good answer. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is John McLeese. As a parent of two children who were fortunate enough to go to some selective schools, Skinner and Whitney Young, got an excellent education. It seems to me the elephant in the middle of the room here is the terrible quality of education historically and even to the present day in the majority of the Chicago public schools. And I suppose that the fact that the move to charters is a desperate move to improve, among other efforts you're making, to improve education in this monopoly school system. Recognizing that the biggest problem, of course, is the lack of resources, which none of us here are going to solve. I have a big concern about the role of the Chicago Teachers Union in preventing the evaluation of teachers to support the best teachers and to ease out the worst teachers. And my impressions of that have been confirmed by comments of leaders of the Urban Education Institute at the University of Chicago, and of course is not unique to Chicago. My questions would be for the representative of Catalyst, whether she has, in her reviews of all these issues, what her evaluation would be of the role of the Chicago Teachers Union, as I see it, in opposing every single proposal to have a meaningful evaluation process, and having become basically a defender of the poorer teachers, and to the representative of the Chicago Teachers Union as to whether by talking about experience is the big thing, about social factors, but not talking about serious evaluation of teachers, you're contributing this problem. Unfortunately, as an admirer of teachers and a supporter of teachers unions, I don't really expect to get a straight answer to that question.
Well, I don't want to get it. There's some ideological issues here that I don't want to get into, but I will say that over the last decade and a half, it's become much easier to get rid of teachers, even though I still hear from principals that it's not terribly easy. But there is a, you know, for one thing, there's a probationary period before you get tenure, which when I was in school, that was not true, and there are people who are clicked off within that first 3 years. I mean, there is an evaluation process, and actually, if you get a bad evaluation, it's fairly hard to work your way back and get into and stay. So I think that's changing, but you know, the new evaluation system is only like fully being rolled out this year, right? So we'll kind of have to see how that works. You know, I think one of the difficulties is that you know, there's not many just horrible teachers. I think that it's harder than we think to evaluate teachers. I mean, when I went to Chicago Public Schools, we had a teacher that came late every single solitary day and was just, you know, like fell asleep. Now, she should have been fired, and that was a protection. I think that she was the union rep. This was 20 years ago. It was hard. I don't think that it's as black and white now as maybe it was in the past. You know, I think there's just great, you know, gradations of teachers. And
go ahead.
I know you didn't ask me.
I did.
But you said Sarah. I'm Stacy.
No, I said the representative of the
I thought he said
the representative of the teachers union. I'm sorry, I don't remember your
Okay,
names.
awesome. I find it almost unbelievable that we're still having that conversation in 2015. What I find to be the discussion that we need to have is how do we resource our teachers more effectively? How do we provide development that makes sense and cultural competencies that are connected to the places in which they are teaching? What we have found with this accountability movement is the standardization of practice, the standardization of instruction, and the standardization of penalty. Quite frankly. You have para, which is mandated by state law, and you have Senate Bill 7, which put penalties on para, which is mandated by state law. Every teacher in Illinois this year will be evaluated under those terms. Now, there's no teacher anywhere that's happy about it because it also does not come with expressed, specific implementation of resource and development that comes with it as well. It is difficult to be a teacher. We have never really unbraided the complex practice of teaching and learning, and not a general practice, but a practice that is specific to the places in which one teaches. So to have this discussion about good teachers, bad teachers, protecting teachers, no, first off, the union protects due process, which is actually a right that's embedded in our U.S. Constitution. But beyond that, we protect due process because we know that it is also very necessary to resource and develop our teachers appropriately. The teacher and the student have the most profound relationship in this dynamic of teaching and learning, and that, quite frankly, matters most.
one of the things I'm most interested in the next decade is how, you know, there's a huge ed tech industry, and there's a lot of teaching now that's being done via computer, but what's the evaluation for that? You know, and when a teacher is told you put a child in front of a computer and do this program, and then that child doesn't perform, then is it the teacher that's in trouble, or is it the computer program that's in trouble? I'm just interested in how we're going to sort of answer those questions.
I just have one comment from a principal's perspective. The objective of an evaluation system is for improvement and to get better. Now, there's a probationary process if you're not tenured, and once you're tenured, know the union contract and be able to follow that process. I've done it. We know it's difficult, but it can be done.
So what the principal just said is that due process is there, and what the young lady here, Sarah, just said is that, in fact, there's more complex than just saying a bad teacher narrative. And I think that we do need to graduate our ideology in a way in which reflects the current state of teaching and learning in our communities.
And that would be true in all schools, public schools, Chicago public schools,
all
charter
models.
schools.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing. One thing I will say is that charters can get rid of teachers tomorrow, right?
My only follow-up question for the representative teachers unions would be: do you have in the proposal on the table proposals for evaluation of teachers other than simply due process? That would be my follow-up. Do you have your own proposals for?
Absolutely. We, one of the things that I bet, most people don't know about the Chicago Teachers Union, one is that Karen Lewis is a nationally board certified teacher. She is. And that, quite frankly, we produce the most MBCT teachers in the entire nation. at the Chicago Teachers Union through our Quest Center. So teaching and learning, the development of our practitioners is actually a priority that's been a part of our dynamic for a very long time.
I'm afraid we're only going to have time for one more question right over here.
Well, this fits right into what my question is. I'm an ex-teacher. I was a member of the Chicago Teachers Union. And I am pro-union when the union can help an organization succeed. So I would like you to elaborate a little bit further on what the Chicago Teachers Union is doing to, I like competition, so I think what I've heard tonight is actually a good thing, competition between the district schools and the charter schools. So I'd like to know a little bit more about what the Chicago Teachers Union is doing to beat the charter schools.
So competition is what crashed our market. The unchecked accountability of our financial markets and the competitive nature is what crashed it. Teaching and learning is not a competitive enterprise. It is a collaborative enterprise. It is an enterprise that involves relationships and sharing. And when you are competing, I'm not sharing best practices with you. So I would say that one of the things, and many of the things that we do, is promote development in that way, shared development, making sure that our teachers know about the other experienced teachers in the building, but also giving them the tools in which to produce better results in their classrooms and understanding what the growth model actually means. So those are some of the things that we help do with our teachers. And as I repeated before, again, nationally board certified teachers, Chicago Teachers Union produces the vast majority of them nationally.
I think Michael,
working on quality teachers with the Chicago Teacher Union is something we have to continue to promote. There's another concept, and I'm using a term that some people don't like, but the success of a school is based on relational accountability, which is not just getting along, it's relationships, but taking it a step further.
Michael, do you consider yourselves in competition with Chicago neighborhood schools, or do you consider yourself a resource?
So what we consider ourselves, so I'm all for competition in the right way, and at Noble, we compete against each other, and we also cooperate with each other, and I think cooperation and competition, cooperation can work really well together. And what we really want to do is compete to make sure that we're serving the students the best, and that's not anything more than how can we say we're providing the best education for the students. And it's not district so much versus charter, but is this flexibility something that parents want or not? And again, I think parents have definitely said that, at least in many cases, and probably a lot more in the future, that yes, they do want schools that have more flexibility and more power at the teacher and principal level, and partially more structure around safety and so forth. That's what ultimately we're competing for, is how do we get the most kids into college, and how do we get the most students graduating from high school and feeling safe.
All right, and on that we will have to wrap it up. I think we've all learned a great deal today, and we've learned a new word, cooperation, anyway. I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Carlos Escocia.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Stacey Gates Davis, Sarah Karp, and Michael Milton. And we'd also like to thank the school project supporters again, the Richard Driehaus Foundation, Chicago Filmmakers, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Vocal Fund, and also filmmakers Bob Hercules and Melissa Stern. Thanks to all of you for coming. You've been a great audience. You've participated. And if you'd like to keep on talking, you can go to, again, schoolprojectfilm.com, watch the films, or #CharterChat. Thank you all very much.